Chapter 4. So you see that we understood the first four sutras. Yoga is samadhi. Highest state of mindfulness can be achieved when mind reaches to an objectless state. So many masters say that objectless state is emptiness, nothingness, like Buddha. But our master Kapila, almost 3000 years before Buddha, he says, Dhyanam nirvishayam manaha. When the mind is devoid of all the contents, it is the state of samadhi. And Patanjali carried forward. Vyasa commented on that. You can say that it's basically a mind management. And what is the biggest sutra of mind management? Instead, the mind working on us, we should be working on the mind. So, what happens when there is an objectless state? Couple of things to be reminded before we go. Objectless state means the self alone sees the self in that state of the mind. It is like mirror is spotless. So you can see yourself clearly. Reflection is clear. But why it happens? To see into the mirror, we need a light of the sun. Here we don't need any third source to see the self. The self perceives the self by itself. When the self sees the self by itself, it is known as, it is explained in the third sutra, Tada Drashtu Swarupe Avasthanam. Tada Drashtu Swarupe Avasthanam. So it means the self sees the self, that is awakening and realization. That is also the mindfulness state, not by the mind. So when the self perceives the self by the self, it is known as self-effulgent. Then we say it is self-luminous. It is self-luminous. But it is, again, let us make it very clear. According to a traditional wisdom, this knowledge of the self by the self is known as aparoksha anubhuti, aparoksha gyan. Paroksha means indirect. So when we add aparoksha, it is not indirect, it is the direct perception. It is the direct knowledge. The self knows the self by the self. Aparoksha knowledge. Direct knowledge means self knows the self by itself without senses and the mind. Senses are instruments of knowledge. Mind is also an instrument of knowledge. How do I see you? I see, when I say I see you, through the mind and the sense organ. So it is indirect knowledge. I do not see you directly by the self. I cannot recognize you without the indirect knowledge received from the mind and the sense organ. But that does not happen in higher state of meditation. In that state, it is objectless. There is no content in the mind. Means the mind is spotless, totally spotless. So self is reflected there, and we get the knowledge of the self. Senses, their proper and right functioning, even if the sense organs have perfect functioning, even then we receive the indirect knowledge from the sense organ in the mind. Because the senses and the mind add their own preferences. They are more or less, they remain biased. So, what we were covering, first thing is that it is aparoksha knowledge. In Sanskrit, we say aparoksha. What is paroksha? Paroksha means indirect knowledge. Who gives me the indirect knowledge about you? The sense organs in the mind. But here, aparoksha knowledge means not indirect. That is why we practice meditation or mindfulness, to receive aparoksha knowledge. Means the direct knowledge. What is the direct knowledge? The self knows the self directly. That is what is explained by Patanjali in the third sutra, which says tada drashtu swarupe avasthanam. So, what is paroksha knowledge? The indirect knowledge that we receive from the sense organs and the mind. Sense organs and the mind are also the instruments of knowledge to know the material world outside. So, in the fourth sutra, what this Patanjali says, when we don't, or when I'm not aware of the direct knowledge, then the mind is full of indirect knowledge. And that indirect knowledge, in terms of the thought pattern, in the fourth sutra, it says, in the absence of a mindfulness or meditative state, the mind is full of all the contents, whether it is coming from memory, anxiety, reaction, duality, conflict, it is full of those contents, indirect knowledge. So now another question may arise, that if there is an object I experience, mind knows everything indirectly. Mind knows when anything becomes an object in the mind. And when we know the self, when it is objectless. See that point. So now what happens? Say, for example, just think of who am I? Instantly, the intellect creates a thought. I am sum of body, mind, intellect, emotions, feelings, past. Instant thought comes. This is who I am. Intellect with the help of ego sense. Pay attention. Intellect with the help of an ego sense identifies with its own experiences. Then what is the result? Experiences and experiencer got mixed up. Patanjali says in the possibly in the second chapter, what he says that drashta drashtya sanyogo heya hetu. What is the hetu? The cause of the suffering is the identification of the experiencer with my experiences. Who recognizes that I am in stress? Mind. Then the ego sense what it says, I am having a stress, I am stressed, I am suffering. Identification. That is the cause of suffering. So we understand through these two sutras that why Patanjali is stressing to move into an objectless state of the mind. Seer in the seen identification causes the suffering. Now another question arises. Why seer in the seen identification? Why there is an identification between experiences and experiencer? Why there is an identification between the known and the knower? Patanjali gives right answer. What is the answer? Avidya. Avidya smita rag dvesha abhinivesha pancha klesha. It is because of lack of awareness of reality that is the main cause of suffering, which is also known as ignorance. So it means the suffering is caused by avidya, lack of awareness of reality. It creates a chain. From avidya, we have asmita, ego sense. From asmita, we have attachment and detachment. From attachment and detachment, we forget the purpose of life. There is still a yearning desire to live without the clarity of purpose. Then what happens? Then we are always running in life. Then what happens? Then we are tired. We have blame, complaint, reaction, resistance. Do whatever we want to do. We have lost that. There is an identification, and that identification is the cause of the suffering. Until that identification is broken, we continue to live the same life. We may intellectually rationalize. Nothing is going to happen. Look at the way Patanjali explains what is the way for mind management. So that leads us to understand when we are not in a meditative state, what happens? The mind is full of contents, objective contents, and identification with them causes the suffering. See one example, one thought. My honey is very good. It is an objective content. I already identified with it because we like him or her. Another thought, objective content. Now this objective content have many shades that is changing all the time. One day honey reacts, mind says I dislike him or her. Mind creates content again. You see that? The mind has only one thought first. What was that objective content? That I like my honey. So out of the like, we have disliking, we have reaction, we have blame, we have Okay, I understand, he or she is not like this. Otherwise, he should not have reacted another content. And we forget about it. Then the mind says, okay, what you will do if you don't like him or her, another content. So the mind continues to create thousands of contents with only one object. Patanjali now begins with another 4 or 5 sutras to explain, to understand what are these contents in the mind. So we have understood that any objective content, a single objective content, can create thousands and millions of contents in the mind. Can we classify these contents for clear understanding? Patanjali says yes. Patanjali says we have 2 types of classification. One classification is twofold. What is that twofold? Either the content is painful or not painful. That is the first classification of anything that is present in the mind. Anything that is present in the mind. He has not explained 2 types of content as painful or pleasurable. He says any content you can categorize them. At present, it is non painful, which we see. Oh, it's a pleasurable. I like whom I like. I like a smartphone. I like my honey. I like my friend. It's a non painful, which we experience as pleasurable. After some time, let me throw this phone. This is not working. It also becomes painful. So he says, what we experience pleasure coming in contact with anything in the world is non painful. It is not pleasurable because the pain is hidden inside. It depends on my liking. When I like it, then it is pleasurable. And when I like it, when the object or a person works, moves, lives according to my expectation. So my expectations are met. Oh, I like you. When I like you, but it is not possible for any objective person to continue to meet your expectation in life. So at some point, my mind says I dislike, and hence it becomes painful, painful and non painful. So the 5th sutra, Patanjali says, Vratayaha Panchatayaha Kleshta or Kleshta. Kleshta, painful, or kleshta, non painful. First qualification. And second qualification that all these contents in the mind can be classified into 5 types. So, all the contents, all the objects, all the thought patterns, all my experiences, they are the content in the mind. So they can be classified into 5 categories based on their level, degree of perception. But all these 5 types of contents are either painful or not painful. Did we get it? Vratayaha, Panchatayah, klishta or klishta, vritayah, vritti, thought pattern. Thought pattern, vritayah, thought pattern, vritayah. I am communicating now. This is known as a thought consciously created. This is one category. And whatever the thoughts are continuing behind, this is known as vritti. Vritti, you can say circle. The thoughts are being repeated again and again and again with little modification. So the moment it is modified, we can classify them into five categories. I like my honey. No, that day, he or she did not meet my expectation, hence I dislike. So now we have two thoughts related to a particular person or an object. See that. This is a thought pattern. But when I start thinking consciously, that is different. We will talk a little later about it. That is known as pratyaya. Pratyaya is also a thought. Vritti is also a thought. So when say yogaschitta vritti nirodha, so we are talking of five types of thoughts are either painful, non-painful. How many thoughts we have in the in our mind? Millions. One scientist, I read about it somewhere that we have almost over 60,000 thoughts during 24 hours, out of which we recognize hardly 10% of the thought, if I maintain a very high level of awareness. Otherwise, I simply become aware of 1 or 2% of the thoughts, out of which I select even 0.01% of the thoughts. And that regulates my life days after days, weeks after weeks, months after months, years after years, and which I claim this is I am. See that? Sometimes when we claim how intelligent I am, how stressed I am, how busy I am, blah, blah, blah. They are 0.01% of the thought rules my mind. That is how I live my life in stress. How to recognize if thoughts causes pain or pleasure or happiness? Another question. We can draw from a couple of vratayah, panchatayah, klishta or klishta. Thought pattern, fivefold. And all these five types of thought pattern are either painful, non-painful. So obvious question comes, how to recognize if thought pattern causes pain or pleasure? So that is why in the beginning I gave an introduction that drashta drashti sanyogo heya hetu. When there is a identification of the seer with the seen, the knower with the contents of the mind, they got mixed up, results in lack of awareness of reality, ego sense, attachment and detachment, yearning desire to live are fivefold klesha and the suffering. I may say, I love you so dearly, for example. And with this thought pattern, you see that outer expression is so dear, so good. But if behind that thought, we have these five-fold klesha, it has to be painful. It will cause pain. If there is an identification between the knower, the seer, and the contents of the mind, then I have to suffer even if I claim. You see, the majority of the, let us take the same relationship, the couple dating. I love you so dearly. I can do everything. Dating, then engagement. And after engagement, after a few years, mind says, I now realize. Simple mathematical formula. If the mind lives in five-fold klesha, suffering, that is, lack of awareness of reality, ego sense, attachment and detachment, yearning desire to live behind the most cherished thought and most beautiful thought. I'm living in ignorance. It has to cause suffering. Thought may seem very good, still dictated by klesha, cause suffering. And the opposite is also true. Thought may appear very bad if governed by viveka, governed by discernment and dispassion, causes neither suffering nor pleasure. First thing. Now understand the second part. When the thought comes and when do I recognize? I recognize these thought pattern in the waking state, not in the deep sleep state. And these thought pattern converts into dreams and hallucination and imaginations even in the dream state. So let us talk more about the waking state. In the waking state, there is a constant identification with the body. When there is a constant identification with the body, we have secondary level of identification with the objects of the world outside, with the people, with the events, with the things, with the works. Long list. See that thought pattern are bound to be created. Where there is an identification with the body and the mind in the waking state, what is that principle? Drashta drashta sanyogo heya hetu. What is the cause of my suffering? And unnecessary contents in the mind, the fourth sutra. Because of this identification. When this identification with the body and mind takes place in the waking state, first identification with the body, secondary identification. This is my house, this is my friend, this is my enemy, this is my honey, and this is me, this is I'm busy, I'm reacting, and long list. So we create our own miseries. So in order to have an excellent mind management, what Patanjali is referring, so that we should understand the five types of thought pattern. They are either painful or non-painful. Now what happens? The moment I have identification with the body, mind starts with the wrong notion, wrong ideas. What is one idea? If the body will die, I will die. What is going to happen if the body, I have to complete lot of things in the present life, and fear and the anxiety takes over even through the intellect. By rationalization we try to control it, but inside there is something lot burning. So we live a life with the wrong notion. That is the another thing. When the mind experiences pleasures in the body, it is known as non painful. But pain is hidden behind the experience of the pain. My master always used to say, first become aware. Are you happy? Yes. Second point, are you happy with something, some person outside? Yes. The happiness will follow the pain. It is bound to happen because the mind knows, recognizes with the wrong notion that happiness, pleasure is present in that object or a person. Third point. So, what conclusion we can draw? Thinking mind with the klesha behind causes the miseries in life. All the miseries in life. Thought pattern is there, and behind it is governed and dictated by lack of awareness of reality, first cause of this suffering. That leads to creation of an ego sense, that leads to creation of an attachment, and detachment leads to yearning desire in life. Any thought which is supported, dictated, governed by these fivefold klesha, how pleasurable that thought is, it is bound to lead us to pain also. And if any thought is dictated, I would say guided by viveka, discernment, and dispassion, plus six treasures, plus the right purpose of life, mumukshu, yearning desire to discover myself, I can minimize the suffering. Patanjali says in another chapter what he says, Vivek Khyatir Viplava Hanupaya. Now see that Hanupaya means what is the method? Vivek Khyati. Establish Viveka in the mind. That will lead to applied Viveka, will lead to dispassion. Applied dispassion will lead to awakening of the six inner treasures and inner wealth, and ultimately all the three factors will intensify our journey towards self discovery. Here, so we are understanding Vratayah Panchatayah. Vratayah Panchatayah, fivefold. Second part, second clarification, all these fivefold are either painful or non painful. So Patanjali has already answered why it is painful, why it is non painful. So, what is the conclusion by the Patanjali? He has not written, but he has given some of the sutras. What Vivek Khyati Viplava Hanupaya and identification with the seer in the scene. The mind becomes the seer, and the mind also receives the contents. They got mixed up. Identification takes place. That is the cause of the suffering, and the result. How to break that? Vivek Khyati. So, what is the conclusion? Where should begin the mindfulness journey? Viveka, discernment. Not just closing my eyes and looking at the breath. That will not happen. We can focus on the breath forcefully. So, as long as you force, the mind remains quiet. The moment you leave the force, the mind becomes wild. Viveka is not there. So, Viveka is the beginning of meditation or mindfulness. Remember this. Viveka is a knowledge practice. Eastern wisdom is an instrument of knowledge that aims at self discovery. I would say it is an extraordinary instrument of knowledge. Like the telescope, we see the stars. It is a special instrument in the science. So it is a special instrument of knowledge by which we reach to the highest state of meditation, to unfold what is hidden within us. Viveka is the beginning. Patanjali has mentioned elsewhere. Why he has mentioned elsewhere? Because he is only talking of the fivefold classification divided into two types, painful and non painful. So, first classification is giving me the subjective experience, painful, non painful, good or bad, high and low, long list, victory and defeat, profit and loss. I'm going back to Gita. Krishna says. So, first is this classification. But it pervades into all the five-fold classification of the thought pattern. So, second classification is five objective states of the mind. Five-fold classification gives me an idea about five-fold objective content in the mind. And because of the wrong notion, I identify with those thoughts, it gives me twofold subjective experience, painful and non painful. The mind is in a mess. Radi sarupyam etaratraha. In a non meditative state, the mind is either living in painful or non painful. So, another part, hold the mind with viveka and vairagya, that is swinging like a pendulum. Patanjali has not explained in the first four sutras the very process and the method. He simply gave the formula Yogaschattavratti Nirodha. But here we are referring what he says hold the mind with discernment and applied viveka to drop the mind from swinging like a pendulum, moving into two subjective experiences of painful, non painful, that that permeates into fivefold classification. That pleasure, happiness, what our mind claims is an identification, where the mind, due to the false notion, perceives that a happiness is in the object outside. Happiness is outside me. It is in a restaurant where I like a particular food. It is in a person whom I love or am attached. Before we go into the fivefold classification, it is also important to understand one of the most beautiful way the mind creates a particular thought pattern. It is like a spider who weaves his own home and get caught into it. What is that? I like it. I see an object or a person, I like it. Second is, from I like it, this thought becomes very thick. Now see that objective contents, I'm creating objective contents. I like it, it is being repeated. I create another content in the mind. I love it, whether I love a person or an object. I like it from I love it. But that love is simply an attachment. I love it, I love it. Mind continues to repeat itself. That is known as vritti. That is known as vritti or a thought pattern. I love it, I love it. Mind is singing the tone. I love it, I love it. Or I dislike it, I dislike it. So when I say I love it, what is the third level of the thought? I love it, that thought becomes thickened again. I want it. I like it. I love it. I want it. So what is the meaning of I want it? Desire. If I get it, I'll be happy. If I don't get it, I'll be unhappy. So both these thought patterns are created now. I want it, I want it, I want it. It is continuously running in my mind. If I break that lack of awareness of reality at the first stage by viveka, the rest of the thoughts, I love it and I want it, has already gone. But when I want it is repeated again and again and again in my head, thought pattern. Vritti has two options. If I get it, happy. If I don't get it, unhappy. So anxiety on one pendulum, one side of the pendulum. Pleasure is on the other side of the pendulum. Mind is swinging. That is confusion. Can I really think rightly in the state of the confusion? Whatever I have learned is already destroyed. Loss of memory. The last part, I do not know what is right and wrong. I cannot think rightly. Delusion and the suffering. What Patanjali is saying and what we need to understand, a single thought, if we allow it to stay in the absence of viveka and vairagya and the six inner treasures plus the mumukshu, will drive me nuts. I may control it from outside. No, I'm intelligent. No, 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 I'm able to control. Question is the content are still present deep inside. That is the difference between a real meditator and a non-meditator. Real difference between the meditator and the wrong meditator. Now, another part to understand before we go into these five categories, or maybe we will take up these five categories into our next lesson. First thing to understand that the mind is constantly running. It is running on these five-fold classification of the thought pattern. Five-fold classification of the thought pattern is either painful or non painful. The mind knows it 100%. And we forget that this fivefold classification plus painful and non painful, we forget that they are not me. I forget it. So, what happens in the state of forgetfulness? We understood in the uh, previous talks. In the state of forgetfulness, there is no viveka. There is no viveka, that means there is a total identification. So, when there is a total identification, then how I live, I don't live. Mind is living in me. I'm led by the mind. So when I explain I am stressed, total identification. Whereas the real I has no link with any kind of the stress or the suffering. I am very happy. That happiness in relationship to an object is not at all related to my real I. That is the biggest discovery. Our great masters have done it. That there is something which is behind and beyond the sense organs, the body, the mind, and the intellect and the ego, which is the center of our existence. It is the non dual, pure consciousness made up of peace, happiness, love, and the wisdom. But because of identification, because I live in ignorance, I become my own experiences. So Patanjali says, why don't you understand that all these contents, five groups of contents, plus have two subjective experiences are painful and non-painful, they belong to the mind. You are not the mind. Mind is an instrument. Mind is not a master. To make all these principles clear, the Patanjali is explaining the fivefold classification of these thought pattern with two subjective experiences identified because of ignorance. Because of ignorance. So we remind ourselves, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Yoga Samadhi. The highest state of mindfulness is yoga achieved in the objectless state of the mind. Objectless state of the mind is these fivefold classification and two subjective classification is absent. So if we understand these fivefold classification, so the moment these fivefold classification of thought pattern enters into my mind and I follow the meditation with viveka, I say, I'm not this, I'm carefree. Mind, you continue your journey. I don't identify myself. When I don't identify, how long those thought pattern can stay? The fourth state can be changed. Fourth sutra, sarupyam itaratra. Non-meditative state can be dropped, dissolved, and destroyed. But again, in the middle, we should be very clear. Khyati, vivek khyati, viplava hanupaya. Hanupaya, meaning, method. What is the method? Vivek khyati. Khyati. Khyati means, you become very famous. And viveka is before there. So what it means? That viveka becomes totally famous in my mind. It is present at every moment in my life. Before I speak, before I think. Vivek khyati viplava hanupaya. And if not, drashta drashta sanyogo heya hetu. What is the cause of the suffering? Identification. When this identification takes place, when viveka is not there. What is the conclusion of explaining these fivefold classification? Patanjali says, my friend, learn it with wisdom. That is why I say regular practice with wisdom. He says, no, learn it not as a habit. What is the habit? I understand. I know it. But it is still there. Viveka is not there. I understand these thought identifies with the experiencer, and that is the cause of the suffering. So when I live into that awareness, I'm living into viveka, the next moment that thought pattern drops. So Patanjali is saying in the first chapter, he started with the meditation. So he says that pramana viparyaya vikalpa nidra smratayah. So in the first fifth sutra, he explained all these thought pattern, twofold classification. Now, in the sixth sutra, he says here are the five types of the thought pattern. Thought pattern, the content of the mind. Pramana, viparyaya, vikalpa, nidra, smratayaha. So pramana, whatever we say, praman means the factual knowledge understood by the science. What is a fact perceived by the sense organ, processed by the mind. But when we see that fact perceived by the sense organ and the mind with a relative reality, when we distort it, it becomes the second type of the thought. You are a man, you are a woman. Where lies the distortion? You are my honey and I hate you. One example. So we have factual and the truth that you are a man only, you are a woman. Can you show me where is the wife, where is the honey, where is the husband? No. Where is the son, where is the daughter? We cannot find out. And even in a single cell of the body, one example. So first group of thought pattern is fact, relative in the relative field, perceived by the sense organ and the processed by the mind. All those concepts, laws of gravitation, law, Newton's law, my human anatomy, my human physiology. We understand it. Corona is a virus. We understand it. Right perception. Distorted by my preferences due to the wrong notion, that becomes a second group of thought pattern. I don't like this guy, so hence I don't want to talk to that guy. Third, alternating thoughts, not able to decide. That includes imagination and fancies. Third qualification, our mind undergoes all these five-fold classification 24 hours a day. Fourth classification, he says sleep. Sleep is also an objective content in the mind. One answer, one understanding. Second, he says that in deep sleep, still the thoughts are continuing below the surface of the sleep, which we are not aware. Two things. Sleep is an objective content of the mind, and other is below the surface of the total unconsciousness. And the fifth, memory. Our master says that mind is one, has four functional aspects. You may recall mind and memory, one pair. Second pair, intellect and the ego. I thought is present in the intellect as a ego sense. So intellect and ego, one pair. Mind and memory, second pair. Therefore, are four functional aspects of the mind. So Patanjali is pointing out that memory, our cherished memories, our painful memories, our great memories, is the fifth classification. Is the fifth classification. So we'll bring an end to this. Let it be 1 hour. So what the Patanjali is saying? The Patanjali is saying, my friend, first thing to become aware of the thought, feeling, sensation, whatever it is. Whatever is the content of the mind. I was lying down yesterday around 11:30. Mind sad, your eyes are tired. So the next moment, the discernment, I told the mind to create a thought. After all, now you are relaxing. Your eyes will be relaxed. Sleep. No more thought pattern is created. Anything at any moment of time. First thing is to become aware of the thought pattern and then recognize and classify into these five categories. Third point, then see how it is painful and how it is non-painful, so that we can apply viveka, and applied viveka becomes dispassion. So the return journey starts from I want it. It moves to I love it. I love it. Again, it moves up. I like it and I like it and I like it. Burns down in the fire of viveka. Now, ask me any question.